we've gotten the feedback, and I coach with a very specific script my clients to go to each person that gave them feedback. And the script goes something like this. Hey, Brandon, listen, I want to thank you for being part of the feedback. I have no idea what you said, but I took it all to heart. I really got a lot of value from it, but I need some help from you. Would you do me a favor?
Randy, my friend, really good to be with you. Good for our conversation here today. So, we always like to do these Leadership Foundry podcasts when you and I get to talk about things that we're noticing and seeing. And you and I were thinking about our topic today, and we both kind of said, well, we did a session last week on brand, leadership brand, your personal brand.
Yes.
And we thought, wow, this is a really important one, because understanding one's brand and then when there's missteps, how to recover is something that our clients see.
Absolutely. It's interesting. It's a thread that runs through probably every single executive coaching engagement we do, and definitely through some of the executive teamwork we do through the Leadership Foundry. So it's really important to pay attention to your brand. But what's interesting, I'm sure we'll get into this later, most people are not self-aware about their brand.
Yeah. So before we jump into what we do with this thing, we should probably define it.
Yes.
So we may have some slightly different definitions, but I'm curious, when someone grabs you and says, okay, I've been told I need to watch my leadership brand, I need to pay attention to my brand. What are they talking about? What would you tell them?
I think the easiest definition is, what do people say about you when you're not in the room?
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
I mean, that's your brand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really why 360 feedback is so valuable, because you're getting that anonymous feedback. That's really the feedback about what people are thinking about you. But I think when you're not in the room and what they say about you is your brand.
Yeah, I love that Americanism, your ears must have been burning.
Your ears must have been burning.
Because whenever someone says that to me, what they're saying is, I was in a meeting or a coffee conversation and your name came up. And I always think to myself, whatever they say next is my brand.
Yes.
Right? So if they say, hey, Brandon, your ears must have been burning. We were talking about what a lovable train wreck you are. The lovable train wreck would be my brand.
That's
right?
my brand.
But it matters. I had a senior HR leader tell me a few years ago, and I think it's so simple but so profound. The 3 most important conversations about anyone's career happen when they're not in the room.
I agree.
Are we going to hire the person, right? Are we going to promote the person? And then hopefully not the last conversation. Are we inviting this person to find another home?
Yeah, spot on.
But your brand's there. It's either opening doors for you and advocating for you or potentially holding you back. So what are some of the things that you see from clients that are either missteps or things that maybe can cause damage to the brand?
Well, I'm really fond of looking at a topic and then kind of backing up and saying, well, what gets us to this discussion? And I think part of the challenge is our clients, all the business leaders we work with, they're just running so fast. They've got blinders on. They're just focusing on getting from meeting to meeting, task to task. They've got so much on their plate that they're not paying attention. They're not looking in the mirror, for one. They're not looking for cues. They're not paying attention to the room, reading the room well. And they probably don't recognize that they're doing things that are damaging their brand. Here's a good example. You and I talk a lot about communication and responsiveness with our clients.
Yeah.
I'm really busy. I'll get to that email later. 5 days go by and you haven't responded. Well, you don't think much of it because you're busy, but the other person thinks you don't have credibility. The other person, as our friend John Kim says, remember, responsiveness is cheap currency.
Yeah.
That's a great way to damage your brand that people don't think about. You're busy and one of your colleagues, one of your teammates comes up to you and asks you a question, and you just give them a really short answer, and you think, totally justified, I'm busy, right? But that person took it as, you don't have time for me. You don't think I'm worth your time. You're not really interested in my growth or development. So there's all kinds of ways, I think, that innocently we probably are doing damage to our brand. We're scratching the tip of the iceberg with what I just said, but there's plenty more.
Yeah, I think so. I find it's almost more challenging in some cases if the leaders knew, because sometimes they're tasked with a certain goal or objective, and if they pursue it too intently, it can cause issues. So I had a leader that I was coaching this week and received some 360 feedback, and he's in a transformation portion of the business. He's got to transform a lot of the business. And so he's moving really, really fast, and there's a lot to get his hands around. And so there's so many locations and sites, he can't see everybody. He's got to communicate all over email. And it's very operational, not very relational. It's like, we've got to get stuff done. So because of that, the brand he's getting is he really doesn't care about relationships. He's not really interested in building those. He's just all about the task. He just primarily communicates over email. We want to spend more FaceTime with him, but he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't care, is what they might say. Now, that's not true. He's just been tasked with a really big job, and there's a lot to get done. But he's got to kind of balance some of those things a little bit. Sometimes that can be a challenge. Absolutely. And there's a candor session that I lead in the Leadership Foundry. I typically do the candor work, and I often talk, if you'll remember, about it's important that we think about candor as a two-way street. It's a two-way conversation. Most people deliver candor in a way that they're comfortable with, and they feel like, okay, I've been candid, and they walk away. They don't think about getting the other person ready to receive the candor, right? So think about brand in maybe a similar way. We often do things and say things, and we just act, but we don't think about the reaction of the people in front of us. We don't take the time to think about, how did what I just say land with you? How are you thinking about the conversation we just had? How do you feel about our relationship? We spend a lot of time just delivering and doing. We don't think a lot about how the other person is receiving it. And I think that's fundamentally one of the core issues with brand. A lot of our leaders are just not thinking about, I wonder how what I just said landed. Okay, so I want to build on something you said there and ask you a question, a follow-up question. Sure. And the question really is about how do we navigate our brand, kind of who we are, how we show up, maybe our reputation, with the context we find ourselves in. So let's say we worked in a business where it was very manufacturing. It was all about candor because it was very operational. We just kind of talked about the stuff that needs to get done, and we just got right down nitty gritty. And then we move maybe to another part of the country, and we take a business or part of a business that's a little more service oriented. And we're still doing that same thing, but it can be misinterpreted or seen differently. How do we need to think about our brand as it relates to the company culture? And can that be an issue? Well, I think that goes back to what I said about really understanding your audience. What is it that they need from me in order for me to be effective? So I've actually got this situation because I work with a global company. I work with their leaders in the U.S. I also work with their leaders in Mexico. And the cultures are very, very different. Yeah. So in America, we're very used to the rapid fire, get it done, and the way that they respond and act is typically, the norm for the culture. But in the Mexican culture, what I'm finding is leaders, when they are not being courteous and professional and showing empathy and really caring about the people, it's not working. It's landing in a pretty flat way. So I think definitely, to your point, there's a difference in cultures. But I think leaders have a responsibility to not only look in the mirror and have an understanding of how they're showing up, and if they're not sure, they should get feedback. But they also need to understand the culture around them, the people around them. It's again, I come back to this idea. It's not enough for us just to deliver what we want to say, do what we want to do. We have to think about the impact, because there's a human being on the other end of everything that we do. And usually most of the brand problems that I think we see is because we don't spend enough time thinking about who's receiving it and how they're receiving it. Yeah, so I'm hearing kind of being aware of other people, how they're receiving it, knowing the audience, right? Also some level of intentionality, being intentional about what we're doing and how that's potentially landing. So can you think of any other big derailers, that you see with your clients that have damaged their brand? And then we can start to talk about what are ways to recover if you think your brand has been dinged or damaged a little bit. I'll dwell a little bit on the point you made about culture. I think sometimes there is the surface culture, but sometimes there are hidden rules in a culture. Sometimes there are just there's the way that we do things. So let's say, to your point, that there's a new leader that comes in. New leaders join the company, vice president of whatever, came from a competing company. Okay, great, glad to have you here. And you come in and you're reasonably intelligent and pretty self-aware, and you just start operating the way that you always have. But you may not have taken the time to really understand sort of the hidden rules of the culture. Remember, we always talk about blank nice. Every company's got their name in front of nice.
Well, you may be thinking that you're getting candid feedback and having candid discussions, but what happens at the water cooler is really where the real conversations occur. So you need to understand kind of that hidden culture, those hidden norms. So I think that's another derailer, not taking the time to get to know what's going on. I will tell you a trick that I've often encouraged my clients to follow. Is go find the most experienced executive assistants in the organization and go befriend them and pick their brains. What does it take to be successful around here?
Yep.
What do I need to be thinking about? What's how do we operate here? What do I need to be avoiding as a leader? Go find those executive assistants because they know they're a treasure trove of information.
Agreed. I think that's brilliant. Quick hack because they can help you kind of navigate some of those cultures.
Yes.
So one more question for you, and then we'll get into more.
Yeah.
Kind of how do we navigate this a little bit? So talk a little bit about the difference you see with brand and how that changes expectations and how those change as you move up. So a mid-level leader versus a senior executive. What are some of the adjustments people need to be making?
I'd love to turn this into a math equation because it feels like there's like a multiplier effect. From director to VP to SVP to C-level, it's exponentially greater. And it's like a pebble in a pond, right? If you're an SVP or a C-level executive and you do something that really is a negative for your brand, it's probably affecting dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of people. So, that really curt email you sent out because you were, really frustrated or maybe you had too much going on, you sent it out, but it probably went out to a lot of people. So there's a multiplier effect to what happens at the more senior levels. I think if you're a mid-level manager, often it's pretty easy to recover from brand damage. Like, hey, I'm in the middle of the firefight. People give you grace. I'm not really affecting a lot of people. I can get back on track. And you and I typically coach that VP to C-level executive.
Yep.
When damage is done, it's lasting and it's pretty far-reaching. So I think that's the difference. What's your take?
I think that's a big one too. I think the other one I would also say is when you're kind of a mid-level leader or below, you can really just focus on your team.
Yeah.
Focus on your team, your business, your little island. Works really, really well. And to be very honest and very transparent and candid, you're probably competing with other managers at your same level for the next job.
Yes.
So you kind of want to show how great you are with your little island. That gets you promoted. But then that needs to change. So here's a great story that I love to share. So several years ago, I was doing a session on executive presence for a group of senior leaders. And they said, they used a basketball analogy. They said, what gets you promoted in our organization is scoring lots of points a night. Dropping 45 points a night. That's what gets you promoted. So you're kind of outperforming your peers. They said, but that's non-executive presence, which is another way of saying brand at a senior level, executive presence. They said, that's not executive presence. That's not a good brand. The executive presence is points and assists. You're passing the ball so other people can score. So I think that's another derailer and thing that I commonly see with clients is they get to senior levels, they're still trying to focus on just their organization as if it's number one, and they need to make sure they're passing the ball as much as possible and helping other people score, which is a hard muscle to learn because you're used to these people next to you being competitors for the next, friendly competitors, frenemies, right? For the next job. But there is no next job. You're a senior executive. You've got to pass the ball, and that's a little different.
So can I share a more obscure story?
Yes.
So there was a chapter in my last book, Upon Reflection, on what a 12th century saint can teach us about candor. I don't know if you remember the story.
Yeah.
But it was about Saint Thomas Becket. And before Saint Thomas Becket was eventually murdered by the king for being too candid, he was on his way.
That's not a good endorsement not a good endorsement for candor, Randy.
There's a silver lining there.
There is a possibility you could get murdered, but that's okay.
But the story is on his way to be ordained as the Archbishop of Canterbury. He turned to a trusted friend, and what's been handed down to us is the conversation. And he said to his friend, "I need you to come to me in private when I err. It is dangerous for men in power to not have candid voices in their lives." So that has been handed down to us through history. What's interesting and relevant to your point about what happens as you go up the food chain, as you grow your career, as you get more senior, fewer and fewer people tell you what's really going on. You live in a bubble. So unless you specifically go out and seek feedback, unless you've got trusted counselors and guides around you, you often are less and less inclined to really know how people think about you because you live in that bubble. So Saint Thomas Becket's advice is always have people around you who are trusted that will come and tell you what's going on.
All right, Randy, you just built our bridge for us. So we're going to move into the last part of the conversation.
I'm a known bridge builder.
Yeah, well, just fantastic. So we're going to now move into how do you, if you think or have hints, or maybe your brand has been damaged.
Yes.
What can you do to start to repair, rebuild, or transform your brand?
So I will take you through the way that I approach a typical executive coaching engagement. We're both executive coaches. We do similar work. And I think about almost every single engagement. There are really a couple of things going on. This leader, which by the way is a leader that the company values because they're making a significant financial investment. So we want this leader to thrive, but they're a little off track. Something's happened. They may have damaged their brand. They need to acquire a new skill to get to the next level, whatever the reason is. So we come into an engagement knowing we need to help this leader bridge the gap somewhere. But we typically almost always have some brand damage. Something has happened to get this leader on the radar where we need to get them a coach. So a couple of things, and I think we both follow a similar pattern. We do robust 360 process.
Yep.
I will interview 15 to 20 people around that leader, their supervisor, all their peers, all their directs, other members of the team, and stakeholders in the org. And I interview all of them. It's a live interview. It's not a survey. I don't think feedback surveys are not helpful. I interview them. I gather all the feedback. It's anonymous. And then I share the raw feedback along with themes that have emerged from the feedback. So this leader, often for the first time, almost every time, is getting feedback that they've never heard before.
Right.
They had no clue that they were coming across a certain way. They had no idea that people had a feeling about them. They were talking about them negatively in the closed rooms. So I think that feedback process is invaluable. So that gives us a treasure trove of things that we can work on, and we could spend all day talking about all the various ways to fix specific things. But there's one thing that I'll put on the table as one of my favorite best practices to help repair damaged brands. I call it the Grace Tour. So we've gotten the feedback, and I coach with a very specific script my clients to go to each person that gave them feedback. And the script goes something like this. Hey, Brandon, listen, I want to thank you for being part of the feedback. I have no idea what you said, but I took it all to heart. I really got a lot of value from it, but I need some help from you. Would you do me a favor? Going forward, I want to invite you absolutely with great sincerity to please give me feedback on an ongoing basis. I need to hear from you. Just pull me aside and let me know if you observe anything that gives you pause or concern. I need that feedback to keep growing as a leader. The other thing I need from you is grace and patience. It's going to take me a while to turn the corner to get where I want to go. But if you'll be patient with me, give me that grace, but also give me ongoing feedback, I'd be so grateful. And what you do is you immediately take people that may have been on the outside throwing rocks, people that were probably not giving candid feedback. You've invited them into the circle of trust. You've invited them in to give you feedback on an ongoing basis. And in my experience, most people take my clients up on this. So the feedback done well, along with the Grace Tour, are two ways that I've seen to really help my clients get back on track and repair damage.
Gosh, Randy, that's really, really good. It's hard for me to add to that. So as you were talking, I agree with both those things. I think it's such a great way to assess brand is get that feedback. And the way that you and I do it with the interviews, it doesn't have to be you and I, but getting real feedback, not just the electronic feedback.
Right.
To be able to act on that, to see what people are saying about you, and then make that invitation to kind of help them, bring them along so they give you more feedback going forward. I think it's great. One other piece I might add to this is something maybe even more upfront in this. So often when we get a misperception or a damaged brand, it's because people are interpreting our behaviors in their own way.
Right.
We don't respond to them quickly. We send a gruff email and they say, he doesn't like me. He doesn't care about me. He's going to fire me, right? They make up stories in their mind. And so it's this balance. So I'll go back a little bit. When you and I work with private equity, Typically, there's really only two kinds of leaders that private equity put in their businesses. I'm a big fan of private equity in many ways, but they typically pull from two kinds. The first leader is the surgeon. Surgeon's job is simply to get the patient's dying on the table. They bought a business that's struggling. The surgeon goes in there and they are rough and they are gruff and they have very little to no bedside manner. Right. Use colorful language, but their job is to get the patient off the table.
Yes.
Their stint is typically about 2 years. And so their brand is never going to be very endearing, but it will be keep the patient alive. And then there's more like the general practitioner, right? Like the doctor you want to go see every year for your physical and they kind of guide your health. Then that's the second kind of leader private equity will put in. And this person's really designed to help kind of lead and grow a stable business. And they care about culture and they care about people and that's part of kind of their reputation. The reason why I'm sharing that is because sometimes we get thrust into situations where it is the patient's dying on the table. And we've got to act a little more like that surgeon. If you find yourself needing to act like a surgeon, you're not going to get a very endearing brand. And it's largely because you have to make these changes. They're tough changes, tough decisions. And if you don't, people are going to lose their jobs.
Right.
And where most leaders go wrong, it's not that they do that incorrectly. Often they drive really, really hard, and they've done that before. They don't tell their team why they're doing it.
Great. That's a great insight.
That's so important. So right out of the gate, say, hey, team, this is going to be a rough next 6 months.
Yes.
We've got a really important work to do. I want you to know I care about all of you. It may not always come across that way. It's because we've got some work that we need to do. When we're done with all this, we'll celebrate properly.
Yes.
But if you feel like we're not getting kind of that relationship time that you want, it's not because I don't care. It's because we just have a ticking clock behind us. And if you say that, then it allows people to understand your intentions and to give you a positive intent.
And it comes back again and again and again to clear, open communication and candor again and again.
So right out of the gate, if you state your intentions, it's going to prevent a lot of damage. But if you do find some damage, then get that feedback and then invite people to help you course correct down the road. But I see leaders move so quickly in those roles where they've got to be a surgeon, they forget to tell people why they're doing it. And then people make up all these stories about this person not being nice and doesn't care about them. And then that creates more issues they need to work through. So
if we come back to this concept, this idea of, I think we're saying that leaders are often flying blind. They're not aware that there's brand damage. We kind of said that a couple of different ways. One of the things that we often teach and preach and coach in really every setting, either executive coaching or Leadership Foundry, is we talk about the need for specificity in feedback, asking specific questions. We often joke, but we're actually pretty serious when we say it. The worst thing you can do is say, am I doing okay? Everything okay? Everything great? And what we'll get is yes, fine. So instead of doing the generic feedback request, Brandon, listen, yesterday in the meeting, I'm really not sure I showed up as well as I could have. If you could give me 2 coaching tips on what I could have done to present better and maybe really reach the room, what could I have done differently?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the feedback will be incredible. How about this one? Because we're talking about brand. Listen, I'm not sure that I'm really connecting well with the team. In fact, I feel like there's a bit of a vibe in the team culture right now. What am I not seeing that I need to be aware of? What are some things that I need to do differently as a leader to help our team get where it needs to go? Bill, give me your feedback. When you ask a specific question, you will get a specific answer. Ask a generic question, you get a generic answer. So marrying specificity to feedback request is a must. And we didn't talk about it enough earlier, but I want to make sure I made that point.
I think that's really good. So I've got a couple other points, and I think we may be wrapping up our conversation here today. So yes, and you and I, whenever we do sessions with Leadership Foundry and we are teaching concepts, we always end with the same question. What are you going to start doing, stop doing, or continue doing?
Yes.
Right? We always ask our participants, our leaders in these sessions to reflect on the content. The stop, start, continue question is a great question to ask members of your team. Pause at the end of, get them at the end of a one-on-one and say, now you got to let them know you're going to ask it so they're prepared, but say, hey, what can I start doing to support you better? What can I stop doing that's getting in your way? And what can I continue doing? It's a great way to kind of gather some of that feedback.
Can I go tangential on you for just a second?
Of course, please.
Because you made a brilliant point, but there's something to think about here. Oftentimes, people associate brand issues as something really big like is he stealing from the company? Or, he embarrassed himself at the company picnic. That's not what we're talking about. It's sometimes little things. When you talk about stop, start, and continue, you may get back, hey, listen, we'd appreciate it if you'd actually let us ask you questions at the end of a meeting. It seems like you don't care. We would love for you to, maybe not send a 7-page email to us. Can you give us the bullet points? You're overwhelming us with stuff. Little things like that are also part of the brand.
Yeah.
So when you talk about stop, start, and continue,
Yep.
it's down and dirty, the practical stuff. It's not embarrassing yourself at the company picnic.
So true. It's as I talk to all my clients, it's not about light switches. We're not talking about hitting light switches up and down.
Right.
It's more like dimmer switches. It's a dial.
Yeah.
You're just turning the dial a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. Little things like that can make a big difference. So the last thing that I would say in all this, my experience has been, if you've gotten feedback and you decide, okay, I need to make some changes, and you're going to change your brand.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, let people know that you're working on this. Don't be surprised that in the beginning, people look at you kind of funny.
Yes.
Like, what is this? And then what they're asking themselves is this real? They've probably talked to a coach. They're working on something, but is it really going to last?
Mm-hmm.
And it typically, if you're trying to rebrand, my experience is it typically takes about 6 months
Yes.
of doing a new behavior
Yes.
every day
Yeah.
before people say, okay, this is real. This person's actually really heard the feedback and they've legitimately changed. They haven't kind of slid back into their old ways. If you're in a more of a global organization and you have less touch points with people,
Mm-hmm.
it can take longer, simply because they're just not as exposed to you. So you need to give yourself patience if you do want to make some changes
Mm-hmm.
to how people perceive you as a leader. It's not while you may be making the changes, it's going to take a while till people say, okay, I believe this.
But see, this is why I want to promote the merits of the Grace Tour. Because one of the things that's inherent in the Grace Tour is humility. Hey, listen, I got the feedback. I have no idea what you said, but it really impacted me. I learned a lot from the feedback. Okay, number one, there's humility and vulnerability involved in that. And then you're asking for ongoing feedback, and you're also asking for grace and patience, also manifestations of humility and vulnerability. So if you do the Grace Tour well, people will, because I agree with you, they'll look past is this just surface, and they'll buy into, wow, you're asking them to be part of your support team now. You're saying, I want to grow as a leader long term. You're kind of inviting me to join that effort now.
Yeah.
It's a powerful way to bring people along with you, because I agree with you. You and I can give a coaching tip on the Tuesday meeting. The next day they're practicing, but it takes a while before it's not clunky. But the Grace Tour idea is something that really will build something permanent. So I just wanted to add that in because I think it's important.
Randy, beautiful. I think this was a really great conversation to help people think about not only how they're being perceived, mm-hmm. but what they can do if there is a brand misalignment with what they want. Mm-hmm. So thank you, my friend, for all your insights.
Always a great conversation. Always enjoy it.